Hey guys, this is Coach Ross, World History. This is the Unit 6-2 exam review. This is a massive unit. It's going to cover everything from the end of World War II to today. So we're going to go through several slides. You're not going to find test answers in this review, but I will kind of go over all the material that you will be required to know for this test. So first we're going to start with the Cold War. The first thing that we did after the last test was go over Yalta and the Potsdam Conference and how that contributed to the start of the Cold War. And really what you want to focus on is the division between the Soviet Union and the United States. Part of that was with the Marshall Plan. Remember, the Marshall Plan was from George Marshall, who was the Secretary of State at the time. And basically the plan was to give massive amounts of economic aid to Western Europe in order to keep those countries from falling to communism. Also, you need to know about containment. This was in the Civil War worksheet that was on Google Classroom, both the Marshall Plan and containment. And the idea was it was a policy that was in between full military action and appeasement. And we already knew that appeasement wouldn't work because they tried that before World War II. And one of the theories associated with containment is the domino theory. And we went over that several times throughout this unit as well. But basically the idea is that when a country falls to communism, its neighbors were more at risk to fall to communism. So the idea was to kind of contain communism where it is, and eventually it will die out. Also, the arms race, all right? One of the terms that you guys will need to know, and it's on your blueprint, is the term brinkmanship. All right, so make sure that you guys go over that. It should be in your book. And also, you guys are going to need to know about the space race specifically. You need to know about Sputnik and the U.S. response to Sputnik. And really, you need to focus on Kennedy's declaration that the United States would land on the moon by the end of the decade, which we just barely did. And so make sure these are kind of the common themes throughout the Cold War. And then in a few slides, we'll kind of go over the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. All right, so here are the main Cold War conflicts that we covered in class. The first one's the Berlin airlift. So immediately after World War I, Stalin wanted to basically blockade the Western European zones of Berlin, and the United States wasn't going to allow that. So for several months, they actually airlifted and dropped supplies to the Western Berliners. So just be aware of that, and you probably do need to know some of the dates and kind of the order that this stuff happened. Next is the Korean War. We also covered this in the Cold War conflict, but Korea was divided between the North and the South. North Korea was communist, South Korea was democratic, and North Korea ended up invading South Korea, and so the United States became involved. This is in the early 50s, so you're looking at like 1950 to 53, and basically after 3 years of fighting, there's an armistice that was signed, and the border remained at the 38th parallel, which you can also see in this picture right here. The next one is the Cuban Revolution. In 1959, Fidel Castro, who was a communist, overthrew the government in Cuba, overthrew Batista. And because of this, Cuba's proximity to the United States is very, very close, and so the United States was worried. And then they get involved in the Bay of Pigs incident. You will need to know a little bit about that. And then eventually that will kind of lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we covered that as well. There should be some notes on my website if you need to go back over that for a refresher. In the late 60s, I think it was 1965 to 73, the United States was involved in the Vietnam War. Same thing, it was the North versus the South. North Vietnam was communist, South Vietnam was not. there was a gradual escalation from U.S. troops, and eventually the war became very unpopular. The United States left Vietnam, and eventually the North Vietnamese took over the entire country. And the last one that we're going to cover, this was one of the proxy wars, was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And this was known as the Soviet Union's Vietnam War. So they got bogged down in a guerrilla warfare in Afghanistan, and they were it was a very unpopular war in the Soviet Union. All right, so Communist China. So if you guys remember the video that we watched, it talked about the civil war going on in China and how the civil war lasted even through World War II. And after World War II, there was what was known as the Long March. And so you guys can kind of cover that. And that really led to the rise of Mao Zedong, who was the communist leader in China when the communists did take over. One of the things that you do need to know about Mao was the Cultural Revolution, which was basically Mao reasserting his communist principles over China and encouraged the youth to purge China of all the undesirables. And a lot of this was done through what was called the Little Red Book. It was this book that was given. It's basically Mao's political ideas that he wrote down. It's one of the most widely produced books of all time just because of the population of China. Everyone was pretty much required to have one and read it. So there was over 1 billion copies made. But basically, go over all the readings from the China timeline. If you guys remember that, really 1 through 13 are probably what you need to focus on. After the 13th, the last 3 are more about modern China. However, go back over those readings. They're very, very short. It should not take you very long, and then you should be prepared for everything over Communist China on the test. All right, for decolonization, make sure you go back over the notes and that decolonization worksheet that we did. But real quick, the 3 main movements that we looked at were the Indian independence, African independence, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. With the Indian independence, I would definitely make sure you know who Mohandas Gandhi is. He led protest, nonviolent, non-cooperation that influenced Martin Luther King. So you definitely need to know him. You definitely need to know the contributions of the first Prime Minister Nehru. And you also need to know about his daughter, Indira Gandhi. And basically, she was one of the first to recognize that India had a population program, and she tried to do some things to help curb the population growth in India. And also, she handled a situation poorly with the Sikhs. The Sikhs were protesting, and she responded with violence, and then she ended up being assassinated by 2 Sikh bodyguards. For the African independence, go back over the reading that's hyperlinked within those notes. But basically, you need to know the characteristics. We can't go over every single African independence movement because there are so many. And if you kind of look here on the map, you can kind of see from 1950 to 1980, they all went from being colonies to being independent countries. However, you need to know the characteristics of these countries. You should be able to know that they had weak economies, and you need to know about the social problems within these African countries, and also the type of government that most of these countries had, which were usually, sorry, I cannot write today, military dictators. And also the Arab-Israeli conflict. You guys need to know the basics. I know you guys studied this last year in geography. You should have some background knowledge. But basically, after World War II, Palestine was partitioned into a Palestine and Israel, and you can kind of see from the map the amount of land that the Palestinians lost from 1946 to 2000, and kind of understand the basis of what led to that conflict. All right, for the end of the Cold War, go ahead and rewatch that video that I made. Not that it's that great, but it does have a lot of the basic information that you guys do need to know. Also, go back over the visual vocabulary assignment, but I'll briefly go back over these 5 terms in PIPA real quick. Really, with detente, it basically means the relaxing of tensions. You do need to know when that occurred. And under what president. Hint, it's this guy right here, Ronald Reagan. You need to know how his policies affected the fall of the Soviet Union. So really, you're going to look at his spending habits and his strategy of increasing spending would weaken the Soviet economy. Mikhail Gorbachev, really you need to focus on his policies, which are listed below: Glasnost and Perestroika, which I know I'm mispronouncing, but it's okay. So go ahead, make sure you guys go back over and understand how those policies helped lead to the fall of the Soviet Union. All right, for genocide, we looked at 3 main genocides. The first one we looked at was the Cambodian genocide under the, I hope I spell this right, Khmer Rouge. All right, and their leader was a guy named Pol Pot, and if you remember from the lecture, he wanted a communist utopian society. He basically kicked everyone out of the city, put them in the countryside. They were forced to adopt an agrarian lifestyle, and it went very, very badly. So go back over those slides on the lecture. It was a pretty brief lecture, but there's a lot of the main information that you guys need to know. The Bosnian genocide, really it was led by a guy named Slobodan Milosevic. I hope I spelled that right as well. It's this guy right here, and basically he wanted a greater Serbia, and you can kind of look from the map. Serbians committed genocide and ethnic cleansing to Bosnians and Croats until eventually they kind of formed an alliance and the genocide stopped. He was convicted of crimes against humanity, and then he died in 2006. So this is kind of within pretty recent stuff within your lifetime. The last genocide that we went over was the Rwandan genocide. This happened in the mid-90s, mostly between, or not mostly, exclusively between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And remember, these were 2 tribes that the Belgians kind of put together, and the Tutsis only made up 15% of the population. However, they had most of the land in Rwanda and the political power. And after the Hutu president was killed in a plane crash, there was 100 days of genocide. So there was about 1 million people who died in those 100 days. So make sure you understand the main characteristics of these 3 genocides. All right, important people, this is going to be very, very short. Go back over the PowerPoints that are on my website. All right, you guys did all this research. You should have taken notes, but you will see Oscar Romero, Mohandas Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Pope John Paul II, the Tiananmen Square protesters, Le Valesa, and Las Madres de la Plaza de Mayo on the test. So you will see these. You need to know their accomplishments, what they fought for, and the significance of all of these people. All right. This is a huge unit. Please do your blueprint, guys. If you do the blueprint, you get 10 extra points. You're more prepared for the test. Make sure you study. Remember, studying is simple. It's not always easy. If you have any questions, please email me, and good luck.